standing as high in the water as one of your skyscrapers. And God himself, they said, couldn't sink her.
In 1980, a single film once spent an estimated $40 million trying to lift a ship off the ocean floor and earned back only about $7 million when it finally reached audiences. That is not a rounding error. It is one of the largest gaps between budget and box office in the history of studio filmmaking. And it happened on a movie called Raise the Titanic. The story starts not with disaster, but with real confidence.
It's gonna crush the deep quest.
Indicates electrical fire on the left.
If we can't cut loose that submersible, we gotta bring up the Titanic.
Raise the Titanic was based on a best-selling 1976 novel by Clive Cussler, part of a wave of adventure fiction that publishers and studios were actively converting into big-screen event films during that decade.
We're not concerned with those tonight. We have nothing to sell you at all. We're merely going to analyze rather coldly by means of direct questions and blunt questions why some pictures he's made didn't go down as well as they should.
Director and producer Stanley Kramer was originally attached to the adaptation before selling his rights to Lou Grade, the British media executive whose company, ITC Entertainment, had built its reputation on hit television series and was now trying to establish itself as a serious force in feature films. The premise carried built-in stakes of its own. A secret Cold War operation to raise the actual wreck of the Titanic from the seafloor in order to recover a rare mineral needed for a missile defense system. On paper, it combined a best-selling property, a topical Cold War hook, and the kind of large-scale spectacle that had already proven itself at the box office earlier in the decade. For Grade, a man who had spent decades succeeding in television, this project represented something more than another production. It was meant to prove that his instincts could translate to the far more expensive, far less forgiving world of studio cinema. The broader industry backdrop made the gamble look even safer at the time. The years leading up to production had already shown studios that audiences would turn out in enormous numbers for effects-driven spectacle built around a single unforgettable set piece. Whether that meant a mechanical shark, a spaceship, or a natural disaster rendered at massive scale.
I truly believe that it does not necessarily follow that a film which is unsuccessful at the box office is of necessity unsuccessful to the people who created it.
A film promising the literal raising of the most famous shipwreck in history fit naturally into that pattern, and it is easy to understand why executives approved a budget that, at the outset, looked ambitious rather than reckless. The mistake was in underestimating how much the spectacle would ultimately cost to deliver convincingly, and how much could go wrong along the way. But with a best-selling book, a confident backer, and a premise built for spectacle, what actually went wrong?
Adam?
Part of the answer sits in the screenplay. Adam Kennedy received final credit for the script based on an adaptation by Eric Hughes. But the production is widely described as having gone through an unusually difficult development process, with multiple writers brought in at different stages to reshape the story. Each revision moved the film further from the lean thriller structure that had made Cussler's novel a commercial success, and critics who eventually reviewed the finished picture consistently singled out its dialogue as flat and overly explanatory, the kind of writing that tells an audience what is happening rather than showing them. A story originally built around tension and a ticking clock had, by the time cameras rolled, become something slower and far more procedural. The larger problem, though, was not on the page. It was in the water. The film's entire premise depended on convincingly showing the Titanic being raised, which meant building a full-scale physical model and filming it on open water. Grade pushed for a larger, more impressive vessel, and the finished model stretched roughly 50 feet long, built at a cost of close to $500,000 on its own.
That those films out of which I got the most satisfaction were not those films which of necessity registered at the box office.
Yes.
Once it was completed, the production ran into a problem nobody had accounted for. No water tank anywhere in the world was large enough to actually film a model of that size. The solution was to construct an entirely new 10 million gallon tank offshore in Malta, adding a further $6 million to a budget that had already climbed well past its original estimate. It is a detail that captures the production's core mistake in miniature. Every decision aimed at making the spectacle more convincing ended up requiring another decision nobody had originally planned or budgeted for. That single set piece changed the entire financial shape of the production, and it is worth pausing on exactly how far the number moved. Reported budget estimates for the finished film range between $35 and $40 million, an extraordinary figure for the time, driven overwhelmingly by the physical demands of one recurring image, a ship rising out of the sea.
Everybody doesn't believe that we'll raise the Titanic. You can't see very well from there, but some of you will get an idea. Here's us bringing up the Titanic.
Lou Grade later summarized the irony in a line that would follow him for the rest of his career, remarking that it would have been cheaper to lower the Atlantic than to raise the Titanic. If the budget was the first warning sign, timing became the second.
You see it? Then you see it coming up more. Right? And now here it is, it's up. The Titanic.
Principal photography wrapped in 1978, yet the film did not open in theaters until August of 1980, a gap of roughly 2 years between completion and release. During that window, a television movie covering the same historical disaster reached audiences first, distributed through a company with ties to Grade's own family, meaning the underlying subject had already been placed in front of viewers once before. Raise the Titanic ever opened theatrically. Audience appetite for the story and for the kind of spectacle the film was selling had time to cool considerably before the picture ever reached a screen. A 2-year delay in any era is difficult for a film built around a single technical achievement, since the novelty of that achievement depends heavily on being first. That raises a genuine stake for any studio release. Can a film build entirely around one visual promise and survive 2 years, wait to actually deliver it? For Raise the Titanic, the answer was no. When the film opened on the 1st of August, 1980, critical reception was largely negative, and much of the press coverage focused as heavily on the ballooning budget as on the film itself. Reviewers repeatedly pointed to an extended sequence depicting the ship's raising, shown in slow, deliberate detail, with very little cutting back to the human characters supposedly witnessing it, as a moment where the film's pacing collapsed entirely. The very sequence the budget had been built around became, in the eyes of many critics, the clearest evidence of the production's misplaced priorities. Domestic box office receipts came in at approximately $7 million. Some accounts, factoring in rental income on top of theatrical grosses, place the total closer to $14 million. But even that higher figure left the production nowhere near recovering a budget that had climbed toward $40 million. The fallout did not stop at one disappointing opening weekend.
I think her words were, "Don't get your hopes up, nothing will ever come of this." I've been told that most of my life. In fact, I was told early on, don't write adventure, adventure doesn't sell.
Clive Cussler, the author whose novel had started the entire project, is reported to have been dismayed after watching the finished film, expressing confusion over where the budget had actually gone, given how modest the picture looked on screen. For Lou Grade, the failure did not arrive in isolation. Within the same period, ITC released a string of other costly films that also struggled commercially, including a feature built around the disco group The Village People, and a science fiction production that likewise failed to connect with audiences. Combined, those losses placed severe financial strain on the company, and within roughly a year of Raise the Titanic's release, industry accounts described Grade being pushed out of the company he had built, effectively ending his career as a film producer. The film's failure also illustrates a pattern that has repeated across decades of studio filmmaking since, where a single technical set piece becomes the organizing goal of an entire production, absorbing time, money, and attention that might otherwise have gone towards story and character. According to at least one retrospective account, the 50-foot model built for the production was left in place off the coast of Malta after filming concluded, where it sat for decades before sustaining further damage in a storm in 2003, leaving it beyond any realistic repair. It marked a turning point for an entire company. In that sense, the legacy of Raise the Titanic extends well beyond its own disappointing opening weekend, functioning as an early and expensive lesson in what happens when a production's technical ambition outpaces its planning. A film, built entirely around the spectacle of recovering something lost at sea, ultimately left a piece of its own production behind to deteriorate in the same waters. A quiet echo of the story it was never quite able to tell on screen.